There is no one person that is the future of the Democratic Party. There is a people.
Yo, welcome to In the Thick. This is a podcast about politics, race, and culture from a POC perspective. I'm Maria Hinojosa, and I'm excited.
And I'm Julio Ricardo Varela, and I'm excited too.
Dude, because, we have history right here in the studio with us.
Who's in our studio?
Alexandria, Ocasio, Cortez, what up?
Hey, what's up?
Oh my God, you made time for us.
Of course. Community is priority.
Listen to her. We love that.
I love that.
Alexandria, how do you feel?
I'm good. I'm still processing all of this. It's funny because, 4 or 5 weeks ago, nobody knew or cared who I was. And now, I, sneeze and it's on Fox News. And so...
Breaking news.
The Democratic
She has polio!
She's sneezing.
Guys, calm down.
For the two people that don't, or the 2 or 3 people in the United States that don't know who you are, you're the Democratic candidate running for Congress in New York.
Well, dude, and you displaced the guy who was going to become the Speaker of the House in line under Speaker Pelosi.
Right.
Would that have, if that would have happened? Joe Crowley from Queens, who basically, you also represent the Bronx, but basically Joe Crowley was like, yo, I'm going to...
10-term incumbent.
10 terms. He's like, I'm going to win this election, right? And then all of a sudden, you're watching a television set in a bar.
Yeah.
And you freak out.
Yeah.
I cannot believe these numbers right now, but I do know that every single person here has worked their butt off to change the future of the Bronx and Queens. That's what I know.
57% of the vote.
That never happens in the United States of democracy where people don't vote.
Yeah. The way we won was by solving some of that. We increased the electorate 68% over the last off-year midterm primary. It was 8 minutes before the polls closed. These 2 young black men, actually, one was probably Afro-Latino, other one African-American. They're bouncing a basketball. I was leaning next to a tree, and they were like, yo, we just voted for you. They were 19, 20. I asked how old they were. And they were voting in an off-year midterm primary election.
That doesn't happen.
And that's how we won.
Right. And if you win this November, you'll become the youngest woman ever elected to Congress.
So are you figuring that happened because you knocked on a door? Or what made that connection for them? Was it their mom and dad? Oye, me tienes que ir a votar.
No, it was the opposite, actually. I feel like we organized bottom up, but we also organized bottom up in age as well. It was young people that we had kind of inspired and turned out, I think, really first to start organizing. We really touched community organizers who were younger, who were really animated about a lot of issues impacting our generation: student loans, gentrification, income inequality. And they started talking to their parents. I knew, our district is 50% Latino or 60% Latino. It's half immigrant as well. I mean, I thought about how my family votes. My mom is not super political, but she votes. And basically, she'll call me up and be like, oye, ¿para quién? ¿Quién apoyo? Or I'll just call my mom and she'll just vote for whoever she wants to vote. But if I call her, I'll be like, mira, tú tienes que votar por este gente, he's good people. And she'll vote for her. She'll be like, okay. It's the easiest persuasion ever. And that's a lot of what happened in our race. Young people were talking to their parents, their grandparents.
But the young people were knowing about you how?
Digital. It's where the influence is. So digital was really important because it gave people a direct connection. They could DM me on Facebook and I would answer because it wasn't 30,000 people doing it.
It was just you at the time.
Now it's 30,000.
Yeah, now it's done.
You campaigned as a democratic socialist.
Yeah.
So I want to dig into, let's talk about those politics, which, by the way, I was in college here in New York City in the 1980s. DSA was everywhere.
Yeah.
In your campaign ad, you say,
women like me aren't supposed to run for office. I wasn't born to a wealthy or powerful family. Mother from Puerto Rico, dad from the South Bronx. I was born in a place where your zip code determines your destiny.
So in your case, not only is there a zip code, that could have determined your identity. You also are a woman, you're Puerto Rican, you're raised in the Bronx, you're a millennial. So the odds were stacked against you. So what was it, Alexandria, that made you just say, oh, fuck it? Because I bet you did at some point.
Yeah, I think I was literally in a situation where I just had absolutely nothing to lose. I was working in a restaurant. I was bartending. I had been working with families. I had been working with kids. After the 2016 election, a friend of mine, we put all of our stuff in a 20-year-old Subaru and we drove across the country to Standing Rock. And I was literally there standing with indigenous peoples and the Lakota Sioux, watching how a billion-dollar fossil fuel company had militarized itself against American people and Native American people.
And can I interrupt you? How many other young Latinas were there at Standing Rock?
It felt very Latino and Latina.
Just saying. But
It's
no
true.
one was reporting that, right? So they're not, they're
Oh, yeah.
They think of it as an indigenous movement that's not all connected, and you were there. And
We
you
were,
felt,
yeah.
You felt like, wow, this is a moment for you.
That honestly was one of the most transformative
Wow.
moments of my life.
Actually seeing Standing Rock,
Being
the
there.
protest, it was, I mean, I'm really blessed to have been able to experience that too. And I was just like, wow, I've never seen anything like this.
It was spiritually transformative. It really was. And then being there too, it was also transformative in how I thought of myself, because I've always known that I come from indigeneity. But as a Puerto Rican woman, that relationship is complex because Taino people were completely wiped off the map.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
What's happening now is that that's part of a narrative, which is that the Taino people disappeared, but actually hay rasgos. So you have them in you.
Yeah.
But the narrative is that they're all gone. It's
Right,
like,
right.
no.
Right.
They
And I think-
resisted. They've been around.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was like that knowledge where what we don't have on the island is like those original
Puerto Rico, yeah, you mean by the island,
cultures. We
yeah.
don't have those original, like there aren't those customs that you can tap into. But I always knew that I was Taína as a part of me, but I didn't know what that meant because there was nothing that connected me to that identity and that kind of cultural identity and population and the way that we like to think of it isn't there. And so when I went to Standing Rock, it was so hard to explain because I felt this is me.
Dude, I'm having a moment. Well, because it's a very spiritual land
Yes.
that you were on, that we were on. And so, I'm very spiritual.
You're incredibly spiritual.
So,
yeah.
so it's almost like, I mean, the bigger narrative, right, is that actually you were called
I felt called.
to go there.
I felt called.
And being there, they were like, okay, now that we got you, here's the message. And you heard it.
It really, really did feel that way. And what was crazy was the trip down there. I was with two friends. One was a good friend of mine from Missouri. Another was a friend of hers. But I was the only kind of Latina in the car. And driving from New York to Standing Rock, in my heart, my whole being, like I felt like I was a magnet. I felt like this kind of electric type of sensation. And the closer we got, like a closer a magnet gets, it's like that's how I felt in my body.
Have you talked about this, like this deep spiritual thing that happened on Standing Rock?
I haven't talked about it.
You didn't tell Colbert.
No. I've talked about this with like friends.
You
and-
didn't talk about this with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press.
Yeah.
No.
No, this is okay. This
mean,
is
Chuck-
an In the Thick exclusive.
Chuck Todd, yeah, it is.
Can you imagine Chuck Todd talking to
Alexandria
Alexandria about?
and talk to me about that spiritual. No, seriously, I am so thankful, Alexandria, that you are sharing this with us because we get those messages and we're like, that's a bunch of bullshit, And it's like, and actually there's a really important part of the listening to those messages.
Yeah. The whole reason that it started was I was on my couch and I had my iPad up and I was scrolling through Vogue. And Vogue had this little video on Standing Rock. And there was a woman in the video, and I recognized her. And I hadn't talked to her in years or anything, but I was like, I knew who that was. So I DM'd her on Facebook, and I was like, hey, do you need anything? Can I send you any clothes?
Oh my God, I love this so much.
Can I send you food or like, how can I help you? And she was like, no, we need women. That's what she told me. She was like, we need women here. And I was like, what? And she's like, what day can you come?
Whoa.
Yeah.
We're glad you went.
Yeah. So then after you come back, you're like, I'm going to run and I'm going to go out and hit the ground. How much of it is your identity, as a Latina, Puerto Rican, millennial woman, Bronx? Like, how much does that shape you in the campaign?
To me, my identity is a passport to communities. And that is kind of one of the things that gets lost in like political analysis. It's like, she's great, she's Puerto Rican, she's a woman, she's millennial. And it's like, she's the symbol.
Is that like every generic political commentary that you just did? This is very well done.
I could redo every mainstream. What does socialism mean? Are you a social? I did not run as this like socialist. Like, it just wasn't a thing. But because I was endorsed by DSA, and that's like the clickbait. They're like, whatever, the red wave is coming. I'm like, all I want is for people to have health care. I want kids to go to college. I want our climate to be saved from cataclysmic disaster. But there's so much vested interest in preventing economic dignity in the United States because there's so much profit to be made off of low wages.
I have to tell you that I've been feeling a little not hopeful.
Please, if you just listen to this podcast. Just a little.
Just a little in terms of the parties, just the Democratic Party and the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So I kind of am loving the fact that you were like, in the context of all of that, because you're also an economist, right? So you still were like, yeah, and I'm still gonna believe in this shit.
Because it's also, drum roll please, fiscally responsible. Because when every person has health care, they can continue working in their job, they can continue paying taxes, they can continue being productive members of society. A single-payer healthcare system reduces, at a bare minimum, the 20% of healthcare costs that go to billing and administration. And then when you kind of increase the economies of scale, it's more efficient and less costly. So, like, how are you going to pay for it? A lot of these programs pay for themselves. B, you need to reprioritize our priorities as a country because we're now giving military spending increases that the military isn't even asking for. And then on top of it, it's the morally right thing to do.
Okay, so now talking about the morally right thing to do, let's talk about the Democratic machine in Queens.
Yeah.
So moral.
Yeah. And you talk about it. You say this is just not a campaign. It's a movement you're building.
Yeah.
We know your win wasn't an easy one, but I do want to quote The Independent, which was one of the first publications to cover your candidacy. And this is what they said, and I'm quoting, "Queens is a one-party state where the Democratic Party machine wields near total control over the political life of the borough. Crowley, who's your opponent, sits at the apex, the most powerful New York politician you've never heard of."
What?
So you, Alexandria, in this primary election, how'd you experience the Democratic machine? And then put it in the context of other progressive candidates that are kind of fighting the machine.
So fighting against a Democratic machine means people are scared to take pictures with you. It means that when you're walking in a parade, no one wants to be in front of you or next to you.
And you're like, I'm just a person, huh?
Yeah. But I also got it. Like, I wasn't confused.
Yeah.
Because I was also very pragmatic going in. Because I come from a third generation Bronx family, as much as the alt-right likes to say I was like, grew up in Tatooine or whatever. But, but I grew up in a third generation Bronx family. And I know that like machine politics is like this crazy thing. And then the double layer of being a woman on top of it too, because like these county machines are almost all male, like all male.
Like even in the Bronx, like all male and white?
No. In Queens, it's a little bit more white. In the Bronx, it's very Latino, but it's all male.
Okay.
Which brings other issues.
Yeah.
When you have a Puerto Rican woman running.
Right. So it's like you had two layers, and I just wasn't part of the club. And when I first started, I knew that I just knew, like, I'm not going to get accepted here. I'm not going to have hope that this system is going to work for me. So I was just going to build my own.
You built your own club.
I built my own club. And I said, let me see whose needs aren't being met. Oh, almost everybody's? Okay. I'm going to go organize there.
How many people said, "Estás loca, Alexandria"?
Until the day of the election. But not normal people.
Ooh, I love that.
What is that? Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Establishment people, institutional?
Just people who are like really deeply involved in New York politics, who like know what a county committee is.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like people lose the forest for the trees, because once you get involved in politics, you get so like, who's doing this and who's doing that, and this is the best decision for this, that people forget that the vast majority of Americans are not being invited to the table. And so...
Dude, we don't even know, like, where they're serving.
Yeah.
I've been on a different table for so long with you, Maria. I don't even, look for the other tables.
That's why I'm
anymore.
like, okay, invited to who?
What's that?
I did not run against my opponent because I knocked on doors and nobody knew who he was. But it's not just him. Most people don't know who their member of Congress is. But it started a conversation because people would feel guilty. People would feel guilty. Oh, I don't know who my member of Congress is. And I said, okay, listen, relationships are two ways. Sure, you should Google who your representatives are every once in a while. But if your representative isn't making his presence known in your community, that's also on him or also on her, whomever.
What challenges are progressive candidates now facing the Democratic machine?
Some areas are different than others. So some areas this doesn't apply to, but a lot of them aren't connected to their communities.
Right.
They have a lot of money to throw around, so they are very influential in that way. But if you are not connected to the electorate, you can't throw money at that problem.
Dude.
Yeah?
It's a big year for our sister podcast, Latino USA. You know that, right?
Oh, totally.
Because for a quarter of a century, I've been anchoring what is the longest running Latino-focused news program in the United States in English. Hello!
Wow. It's the 25th anniversary of Latino USA. Yay!
And we're going to party. So we want you guys to join us, especially to all of you New Yorkers or those of you can get to New York. On Sunday, August 12th, Futuro Media, in partnership with City Park Summer Stage, Summer Stage, we're hosting a free concert.
You know the lineup? It's incredible. We have Grammy Award-winning salsa artist Jerry Rivera, New Yorican poet La Bruja, and famed percussionist Chembo Corniel.
So get your plans set to be in New York City on Sunday, August 12th at 4 p.m. at the East River Park, right next to the water. We're going to celebrate Latino USA's 25th anniversary with salsa, música, and super good vibes. So we'll see you there. I'll see you there, Julio.
I'm going to be there, Maria.
Hey, we're back, and you're listening to In the Thick. I'm Maria Hinojosa, and with me is my co-host Julio Ricardo Varela, and we're joined by Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. As you know, I've been covering immigration for the entirety of my career, and very soon after ICE was created, actually ICE and the Department of Homeland Security, because they were both born out of 9/11, and when you create things out of a reaction to fear, it just can't be good. So the notion that now on a national scale, and you, of course, are being credited with like, well, wait, here's a candidate who ran on abolish ICE and she won. Mm-hmm. I was just on the phone with a couple of activists. They're down on the border. Mm-hmm. I was like, what's the latest? They said, it's really interesting. Everybody's talking about abolish ICE and everybody is not touching CBP, Customs and Border Protection. Mm-hmm. And just in general, I'm very concerned about people talking about abolishing ICE if you have a Republican-controlled Congress and you have a president who sides with white supremacists.
Yeah.
So can you tell us where you are right now on the kind of abolish ICE moment?
Yeah. So I think abolish ICE was a really strong and important stance for my community, given that we're here in New York. ICE is what has presence. But really it is this whole system, from DHS down, that is broken. You look at USCIS and the fact that there are 20-year processing lines for some people and countries, and that.
Or the fact that USCIS is now spending a lot of its time and effort in tracking down people who became citizens.
Exactly.
And taking away their citizenship.
Which is, there's so many things that happen where it's like, how are there not alarm bells? And that's one of them. Like the fact that we're revoking citizenship. Naturalized citizens of the United States are being stripped of their status. What's next? Literally the only next thing is like, then you just start calling into question the citizenship of activists and journalists.
Or Puerto Ricans.
I'm like so freaking out that we're going to be next.
I was just sitting down with some Puerto Rican activists last night over dinner because we were talking about Maria and like how we can figure out.
That would be Hurricane Maria, not Maria.
Yeah, sorry. We're talking about Maria. No, we're talking about the hurricane, but we're also talking about the much deeper, just colonial status of the island. Because one of the big issues is, so 60% of people in Puerto Rico, 60% of applicants have not been able to get FEMA support because of title documentation complications on the island.
God.
So the way that land works in Puerto Rico is like, you have a home. It doesn't work the way in the United States where you live a place for 2 years and you sell. And housing is not this commercialized for-profit thing historically on the island. You live in a place, a community resides there. When a person passes away, it goes to their children, So like there isn't a same title system in Puerto Rico. And because of that, in order to get recovery aid, FEMA requires title. And there are families that have been in the same home for 100 years. They don't have the title.
I need to know, like, what up with abolishing ICE?
What my hope is that it's also part of a movement. Because when we talk about abolish ICE, we're talking about ending family detention. We're talking about ending a militarized traveling enforcement agency. But we do need to call a lot of these other things into question. DHS. And let's say you don't care about Latinos or immigrants at all, right? Like, let's say like you just buy into all of these dehumanizing arguments. The civil rights infrastructure of DHS is also concerning.
What I've been saying is people who are being denied basic due process for one reason, ultimately, which is that we weren't born in the United States.
The United States Constitution does not say that citizens get these rights. It says that, people here, this is the land of the free, not the free people.
But what are you going to do, Alexandria? Sorry to interrupt you, but, Democrats have been talking about this stuff for a long time. So, okay, again, because it's all resting on your shoulders.
Which I disagree with.
Okay.
Which I disagree with.
True. You're inspiring a lot of others. But when you're in Congress, like, what are you going to say?
Well, on the first note, I do think it's important to counter because movements cannot be on any one person's shoulders. And that's the mistake we made with Obama.
What was the mistake we made with Obama?
The mistake that we made with Obama was, all right, we did it. He's in. Se acabó.
It's all good.
Autopilot. We automated our government because, the Prince of Hope, has been elected to the presidency. No one person, even if they are elected president, he needed continued grassroots movement and support. He needed the 2010 elections. He needed the 2012 elections. He needed the 2014 elections. And we lost all of them. There is no one person that is the future of the Democratic Party. There is a people that is the future of the Democratic Party. There is a movement that I hope is the future of the Democratic Party. But if we take this moment and say, she did it, that's it, it's not going to work. We need to elect lots of other people. Ilhan Omar out in Minnesota, amazing work. Brent Welder out in Kansas, or James Thompson out in Kansas. You have folks even right here up ballot and down ballot. Julia Salazar, state senate. There's a lot of really incredible candidates. We don't get this movement if we just focus on one seat in one chamber on a federal level.
But abolish ICE. Okay, let's say it goes. What does that world look like?
I think, first of all, not to say that we just revert back to the INS. which was the system that worked right before ICE, because ICE was established in 2003. But we also have to ask ourselves the question of how much is this black box detention necessary? And you look at these facilities, we're caging women and children. We're jumping to criminalize people because it's, this is a policy.
Kind of like ethnic cleansing.
I mean, we're on that spectrum, I would say.
Right. You have a campaign 100% volunteer based, right? Is that?
Yeah, it was like 90%. Towards the end, we were able to bring on some folks.
No corporate PAC money?
No corporate PAC money.
Right. And you're on this midterm election season, joined by a surge of women and progressive left candidates who are now running, from Stacey Abrams, right, to Paulette Jordan, and then through the brand new Congress, which was created by the Sanders campaign, right, and who asked you to run.
Some folks, yeah.
Some folks, yeah, right. You all support each other.
Yeah, yeah.
So even last week, you and Bernie Sanders were at rallies for other progressive candidates in Kansas. So is your goal to change the face of the Democratic Party? Is it possible to change it from within, or do you really have to come in and be like, fight the power?
I like to think that I'm really idealistic and optimistic about my goals, and I'm very pragmatic about how I get there, which is one of the reasons why I think our campaign was effective. I didn't run this campaign out of optimistic methods and processes, but it also just because the optimistic, quote unquote, way to run was the way that was most practical for me and how I got there. And so I think that the Democratic Party must evolve to be stronger champions for working class Americans. That's my opinion. And I think that there are certainly incumbents that are sitting in those seats right now that I think some of them are kind of having a moment. They're going, how can I adapt? But I also think that there's a potential that some incumbents, I don't know,
You don't know what?
I mean, I got elected challenging an incumbent, and I like to think that my run was healthy. And so I think that really it's about the openness to change, the openness to adaptiveness. I'm not out here saying everybody has to run and be me. I'm not saying the Democratic Party has to be me, has to be my politics, has to be this. But I do think that we need to stop spending more time at lobbyist fundraisers than we are with our communities. I think it's a problem in our government. I do.
Is it safe to say that you, as a member of the Democratic Party, feel that the current party structure is completely out of touch with its community? Is that too much?
Not completely, but I think a lot of it is. And I think when we see the areas that we lost, we've lost union workers. How are we not looking at the fact that union workers in the Midwest have stopped turning out for Democratic candidates and not be having an existential crisis or conversation over our identity? We are supposed to be the champions of working people. That is what this party was founded on. This universal health care, college, labor rights, these have been championed by the Democratic Party for 100 years. Universal health care is not a 2018 idea. It's a 1940 idea. It's a 1945 idea. It's a 1950s idea. Richard Nixon, who was a Republican, explored universal basic income.
And a crook, but...
Yeah, exactly. But the Republican Party used to be way more left than it was.
Which is actually the question that I have for you, because everybody does look at you, Alexandria, and it's all about hope. And obviously, you're hopeful. But we are facing a really, really dark time in our country. I mean, we're talking about a president potentially being treasonous or having committed treason.
Yes.
We're talking about, the fact that he calls us, this president, the enemies of the people. I mean, this. We are on a march towards authoritarianism.
We're at a very scary point right now.
So in terms of being an elected official who's going to be at the Capitol, how are you trying to process the fact that this is one of perhaps our greatest challenges to democracy that our country has seen in the recent history?
For me, on a personal level, before the election, I stopped feeling despair when I started working my ass off. I felt despair when I was sitting on my couch and watching the news. When I was on the internet, just reading every day go by and our nation sliding into an abyss. But when I started working my ass off, I stopped feeling that. And I can guarantee that if anybody is out there feeling despair right now, if you start working your ass off, it's going to be exhausting, but it's going to be really fulfilling.
And people are going to say, "Where do you want me to work my ass off?"
Yeah.
And what's your answer to them when they're like,
So-
"Well, where do I go?"
Where do I go? I was also in Missouri for Cori Bush, who's running to be the first Black woman to ever go to Congress from the state of Missouri.
No.
And she's running same thing, without corporate money, on a platform for working people. And so this woman came to me and she's like, okay, I volunteered, I donated, I called my representative. What else do I do? And I said, you need to run. And she was like, well, I don't want to run. And I was like, well, you should, because what this nation needs right now is for you to run. But if you refuse to run, then you need to run someone else's campaign. Because what we have right now is we need a bench. Because when a candidate does step up, it's really hard to find someone to be their campaign manager, to be their communications director, because that is where the big money comes in, the consultants and all this other stuff. And to my knowledge, I had the only female campaign manager in all of New York City. And that wasn't because I went to someone and say, hey, I need a really experienced campaign manager. Send me your best guy, because they will send you a guy. And they'll send you someone not from the Bronx, and they'll send you someone not from Queens.
It's going to cost you about $150K.
So I was like, you know what? We need to build our own bench. And I was connected to this amazing woman who's also happened to be Puerto Rican.
Yo.
And
I'm just
And-
like yo.
Latinas
Yeah.
going to save the day.
no, her name's Virginia, and she's in her 40s, and she looked at me. This is the power of representation.
Mm.
She looked at me and said, this girl's got a shot.
And then
Listen.
the Hamilton music broke out.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to waste my
But-
shot. Like,
But out of all the people in New York City, everybody else looked at me and said, that girl ain't going nowhere. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste my credibility. I'm not going to spend my social capital. She looked at me, and I'm sure the way that corporate CEOs see, young male interns and say, I see a little bit of me in that person. And she, to her credit, decided to put her life into this.
say November, you make history, you go to D.C. How will you specifically challenge the Trump administration in Congress?
At my heart, I am an organizer. And so, first of all, I hope in November, it's not just me, but that even if I have just one, like
Like a buddy.
Like
a buddy. You want
Even
a
if I
little
just have
buddy
one.
like going to camp.
Even if I just have one. Like we say, one person alone is an individual, but you get one more person, and that's organizing. Two people is organizing. And so I hope that going into November, it's not just me. I do see there are glitters of hope on the horizon. And if you're listening to this, I need you to look in your backyard and look at who is running for Congress in your area, because there are people running without corporate PAC money. There are people running on platforms of moral courage, which is what they are to me. I don't describe myself as a leftist. I don't believe I'm a leftist. I don't think of myself as a leftist. I don't think our problems are left and right. I think they're top and bottom.
You mean by class?
By class.
Yeah. Just want to make sure.
Class and degrees of power. And so I believe that there's a lot of bottom-up candidates out there, but we need people to wake up and to support them. And if I can get in with a buddy or two buddies, then I think we can really tear it up, in terms of how we directly challenge. I think that you can introduce legislation as a statement. People used to do that in the 20s. To me, the only comparison in our country's history to this moment right now, aside from Watergate, economically is the Gilded Age. We are in a 21st century Gilded Age. And it's scary. We need to advocate for working people. So for me, I think it's introducing very bold ideas that perhaps other people would be scared to introduce.
Yeah, and I know you've been asked it before, but I haven't heard your answer. So when are you going to run for president?
Oh my God, please, no. I'm not there.
No, I know you're not.
Dude, you just went. You literally just went there.
Well, first of all, there's a funny story about this.
I want to hear
Because
this.
the day after the election, okay, I was at that bar. I slept 2 hours. I woke up, and then I was on like Morning Joe. And like I hadn't washed my hair. And
She looks so good, too.
and I was away. My mom is like super quaint. She grew up in a little pueblito in Puerto Rico and she moved here, but she's a school secretary in Florida. So she came up 3 days before the election. And while I was gone for the day, my mom calls me in the middle of the day and she's like, "Hi, Sandy, she's like, some reporters came to the door." 'Cause she was staying at my apartment. And I was like, "Oh my God, did you answer?" And she was like, yeah. And I was like, "Mom, did they ask anything weird? Did you say anything?" She's like, no. It was nice. I had a nice little conversation. And I was like, okay. And then the next day, pull up, New York Post, Ocasio Cortez wants to run for president. And I was like, Mom,
So
what
she's
did
already-
you tell them? I asked you specifically, did you say anything weird? And she's like, "I just told them ever since you were a little girl, I knew my baby was going to be president." So now this is the question I'm getting all the time. This right now, this moment, I'm not even in Congress yet, and this is exhausting.
I'm going to take that smile from Alexandria.
Well, no. And the thing is, too, though, is that I have never been a person ever that has aspired to position or title or power. That is not in my bones. It's not who I am. Literally a year ago, I was a waitress.
Okay, so let's move on to our final segment, which we called Sin Pendejadas.
Okay.
Which, how do we translate it?
Suffer no fools.
Or no bullshit.
So because this is such a strange time that we're living in, and your district has been consistently Democratic for decades, but there are a lot of people in your district, Queens and the Bronx, that probably they didn't like Hillary. And just in the weirdness of our world right now, sin pendejadas, Alexandria, what would happen if the fact that your win actually inspires more of those Republicans to turn out in your district than expected?
There is an artificial division between Republicans and Democratic voters. The division in Congress is real. Republican and Democratic voters are not this divided sand in the line people. I organized in Republican communities, even though they couldn't even vote for me because New York has closed primaries. I went straight into Trump country because there are neighborhoods, there are areas in my district that voted for Trump and were Trump Democrats as well. And I walked straight into those neighborhoods. But you know what? They respect me because of how I won and what I did. They respect me because of the issues that I'm campaigning on. They'd say, "I couldn't disagree with you more on these 2 things, but I agree with you on 8 of them." And I've been getting letters from Republicans and people who call themselves libertarians and identify in different ways saying, "You won it the right way. You won it without corporate money, which is a bipartisan and post-partisan issue." And I'm not beyond organizing. That's the difference, too. A lot of Democrats won't go into deep red areas. As voters, there's a lot more that brings us together than the narrative out there wants to promote.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democratic candidate for Congress in New York, thank you so much for joining Julio and me on this episode of In the Thick.
I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on and for having a real conversation.
Heck yeah. I'm Maria Hinojosa.
And I'm Julio Ricardo Varela.
And you got to go to Apple Podcasts to rate and review us. So please do that for us. Also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at In the Thick Show. Like us on Facebook and tell every single voter that you know.
Okay.
In the Thick is produced by Juan Pablo Garnham, Stephanie LeBeau, and Nicole Rothwell. Our intern is Sheila Colon. Our theme music is Comencemos by Jungle Fire. The music that you heard is courtesy of Nacional Kept and ZZK Records. We'll see you in our next episode of In the Thick. And I want to say thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it.
Nos vemos.
I'll see you next time. Do another one.
Another one. What are your thoughts on Nancy Pelosi? And it's like, I did not talk about this once on the campaign.